using carbon dioxide as a raw material, I think that really has the ability to bend that curve and just completely change the story and make it so that we can actually get pollution and emissions under control. We're in the early stages of that. Chemistry and material science were traditionally things that venture didn't spend a lot of time on. And so I'm excited for that to happen.
I'm curious on your point of view is how you look at investment kind of time horizons. So, a lot of VCs traditionally will look at, 7 to 10 years. They have a certain IRR that they're trying to, get every single year for, their investors. I think some of the challenges that you mentioned, when I just from companies and folks I've chatted with in this space is kind of like you said, it takes sometimes it takes a long time just to even get the incubation phase right. Then you got to look at like decades plus. So like the return, yeah, it might be way more sizable, but the time horizon is much further. How do you think about that?
Absolutely. That is exactly, I think, that's one of the biggest reasons why so many people go into that incremental bucket as opposed to that frontier bucket, right? And I think that you need to have long dated capital in order to make these frontier tech investments, which is why traditionally the main investors have been either large institutions or family offices, right? It's not something that somebody easily can kind of write a check if they have like everyday bills to pay. And that is a issue with the ecosystem and one that we have not solved yet. I think so much of what I seek to do is bring my knowledge of capital and structuring that I've developed for my 2 decades on Wall Street to help soften that blow or make it easier, right? And so, one of the things we do when we're an investor in a company is help the founders. Well, at this given point, maybe debt is a better fit than equity, or can you lease that equipment instead of buying it? Or like, can we figure out ways to, we call it kind of financial engineering, right? Like, how can we help bring that in shorter? How can we build bridges over what's called the valleys of death, where there's not, places where there's not capital? Because every day we can bring that in earlier, we can therefore increase those returns, make it easier, and bring more investors into this market.
Yeah, one thing you said earlier that really resonated as I chat and connect with a lot of folks in this space is there's a lot of really smart people out there solving these problems, and these are they're really amazing scientists, right? And they got this thing in a petri dish, and like, look at this thing I figured out. And I mean, heck, just getting to that for a lot of people, like, applaud them. That's awesome. And the next big challenge is like, now I got to scale this. And I think, the biggest thing I've observed here is, how do you get into the supply chain, or how do you get into the waste stream? Like, I'm always focused on stuff because I think it's just abundant. I recently did an episode where I laid in a week's worth of my family's trash, just so you can see how much stuff is around us. And I just kept looking at these things. And I think probably as a venture capitalist, you can kind of see the mosaic, right? You can kind of see the opportunities and how the parts fit. And like, okay, great. Well, why can't we just do this? And then you realize like, oh, and it just there's getting into supply chains. There's a lot of things that make it really challenging. So I'd be curious, like, how do you, it's always about traction, I think, in a venture model. You want to see something. Okay, great. Well, now show me you can get to here. But then you go, oh, I got to put some dollars to work before we can cross that chasm and show some scale. Like, do you think that's one of the bigger, I guess, impediments to climate is kind of what I'm talking about, is getting that scale and getting in there? Yeah,
absolutely. And we kind of break this down into 2 sets of questions, right? And whenever we make an investment, right, I'm not a scientist or an operator, right? I'm a financier. And so whenever we make an investment, we like to have 2 different validators in each deal, right? And one of them is the scientist or the engineer who answers the question, like, will this work, right? Or can this work? And the other question is like, how are we going to get it to scale profitably, right? And that's the supply chain person. And to your point, in order to do this well, when you're and a lot of times this is what a venture capitalist can bring to the table if the founder doesn't have it, is a bench of industry people who understand these industries and have the relationships who can make those warm introductions, right? And we have that across chemicals and maritime and energy and industrial. So when we see a great company and we're helping them along, we say, well, you should also speak to this person who's going to open these doors for you, or tell you what that procurement person at that company is thinking about, and what their first 5 questions are going to be. Because it's you need all of this team and talent of experts to kind of get these companies to the finish line. And that's part
Yeah.
of why we call it overlap, right? Is like somebody's interest and knowledge overlaps with somebody else's. And you really want that like chain link of a whole bunch of people that can kind of help the company through all of those stages in the life cycle.
Are you stage agnostic, or will you invest at the earliest and the latest of stages? How do you think about that?
Sure. So we have we invest mostly in the earlier stage, I would say, not in the super early stages. We like them to kind of, there's I think a lot of coterie of investors who are like that person, right at the lab, who's kind of making those who's kind of working with the scientists to pull it out of the lab and do that first stage. That's like a very specialized niche area, and we have wonderful relationships with people that we love to interact with, and so we will interact with them and then figure out, and we'll be in touch with them of like when it gets big enough for us, then they hand it off to us and we kind of help on the next way to the pathway. In terms of the helping companies and connecting companies, we do that at every stage, and we have a variety of different ways that we build that business. But we are very focused on making sure that everybody in the ecosystem is helping each other. The beauty of Frontier Tech, it's very collaborative because I think everybody
Yeah.
in this ecosystem is mission oriented, and we all know that like we
Yeah.
want these companies to do great thing. We feel like we're doing things that help society, and like I said, there's not really competition in the traditional sense. Like everybody's kind of collaborating and trying to get to the right answer.
I've definitely noticed that versus kind of other things in the past. Nobody's telling me no. I'm like, I don't think I'm that good and convincing, but I am genuine. I am genuine
Yeah.
and trying to really focus on something that I think affects all 8 billion of us.
Yeah.
And so I'm passionate about that, and just I think just curious, right? And I think that's really,
Yeah.
I think these are fascinating macro things that are really big, and I like to think about that and like, okay, how can you affect the most people? Because there are some interesting companies, and then you look at it and go, oh, you're offsetting 100,000 pounds of CO2. Like it's not that interesting. You're not going to really move the needle. So I do think that's part of the challenge. What are things, if you look in your crystal ball, like you look out a decade, I think part of what makes venture capitalists exciting is you get to see so many things, and you get to, like I said, look at the mosaic and make bets for what's to come way down the road. What are things, if you could look into your crystal ball, you say, wow, I hope a decade from now, these are some of the things that have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost was one that we, kicked off on, which is carbon as a feedstock, right? Using carbon dioxide as a raw material. I think that really has the ability to bend that curve and just, completely change the story and kind of make it so that we can actually get, pollution and emissions under control. Those kind of repurposing molecules. I think we're in the early stages of that. Chemistry and material science were traditionally things that venture didn't spend a lot of time on. And so I'm excited for kind of that to happen. I think with the kind of I think there's a lot of work happening in biotech right now that's very interesting as AI and machine learning, kind of go up to speed, and big data and all these sorts of techniques for processing data much faster, meld with new technologies that allow genes to be manipulated in different ways, such as CRISPR. I think you're going to see a lot of breakthroughs in terms of new therapies and discoveries and cures for diseases that come out of that. So those are kind of like the two for the world that I think are the most important. For the 5-year-old in me, I'm excited about space. Like, I just think that we're well on our way to, whether it's manufacturing in low Earth orbit and, lunar discovery and all that sort of stuff. I do think there's also some serious world positivity to that in the longer run, especially if there's certain things you could manufacture better from space that can really, help society, and, diversifying planets and all that. But there's definitely an element of just personal enthusiasm.
So if we could go to Mars, would you go?
No.
I'm not the first one on that ship, that's for sure.
I would love for other people to go, but I like being home. So.